My name is Jenny Zegler. I'm an Associate Director of Mintel's Food and Drink platform. And if you're not familiar with Mintel, we are a global market intelligence agency. We survey consumers around the world on their attitudes towards various things in food and drink, as well as the CPG industry as a whole. And then we also have a great global new products database where we collect products from around the world. So you're able to see that all in one database, which is really great. I'm excited to be here to talk about Eyes on Agriculture, which is a trend that we've been watching, and it's something that we've been seeing more often across a lot of different categories. And this is something where we're taking a larger look at sustainability, and we see, as the IFT Traceability Central area dedicates to, consumers are really demanding transparency. They want to know more about where their food and drink comes from. They want as much information as possible. And with this view towards traceability and sustainability, we're really seeing this start to move towards agriculture. So wanting to know more about what's happening at the farm level. And so for those of us as ingredient suppliers, there's really now an opportunity to be telling more of our stories, to set ourselves apart from some of our competitors, to be able to say that this is the story we have. We have footage of what's happening on our farms, or these are the promises that we're making to various different agricultural events. And so this is something that we really think is going to continue to grow, and more of an opportunity to set yourselves apart as we're able to tell different sustainability stories. So what I'll be talking through today are three different opportunities, beginning with the fact that transparent expectations are really starting to see more demands for what's happening at the farm level. And then in terms of the stories we could be telling, we can help to prioritize both the land and the people in terms of the stories that we're telling. So how are we being good stewards of the land? But then also, what are we doing to help our farmers or our suppliers or the people who work on our farms? And a lot of potential there. And then in terms of how we can be telling these stories, really showing the proof. We live in such a visual society now with so many different social media outlets and so many different ways to engage people. So really starting to take photos and videos and being able to share that with your clients, whether they be manufacturers or retailers, to be able to say, we are a company that is doing this and we take pride in that. So to look just in terms of how we see these expectations growing, and we have seen for quite a few years that consumers really want to know more about where their food and drink is coming from, and this is really starting to impact that agricultural level. So 75% of Spanish adults that Mintel has surveyed and 74% of Italian adults are concerned about how food and drink companies treat their animals. And so a lot of communication about animal welfare, what we're doing to take care of those animals. In Brazil, 41% of adults who we surveyed who have recently bought meat or poultry say knowing where meat is sourced is important when buying. So again, more of that details. And then here in the US, 31% of US adults who consume vegetables trust brands that have farming details on pack. So this is happening at that brand level where consumers want to know more of this information. And as companies that may source agricultural ingredients, we can also be sharing that information. When we take a look at our global new products database, which is again a database where we collect products from all over the world, and you're able to search that much like you might search on Google, we do collect all of the information that all of the claims that a product makes on pack. And so we have seen a rise in these ethical and environmentally friendly claims, which is what you're seeing here on the screen. From May of 2018 to April of 2019, 25% of global food and drink launches made some sort of ethical or environmentally friendly claim. And a lot of these, as you see there on your left, are environmentally friendly packaging or recycling, which, yes, is important, is a very great sustainability story to tell. And we do see a lot of consumers, especially right now, really concerned about plastic. But what we're talking about today in terms of Eyes on Agriculture are more of these stories from the farms. And so you see from May of 2014 to April of 2015, which is there in the green bars, that sustainable or habitat or resources claims rose to 9% by the May 2018 to April 2019. So a lot of potential to be telling more information and a lot of demand for that. We also see growth in ethical human claims from 2% from May of 2014 to April of 2015 to 4% by May of 2018 to April of 2019. And so these are claims that have to do with fair trade or lack of child labor. And so a lot of, again, interest in these types of stories from the agricultural base. When we look at the regions that are really leading these claims, almost half of global new products that launched that had an ethical or environmentally friendly claim were in Europe. And so really some of these European products are taking a stand and making sure to communicate that to consumers. So what we see here with this Jordan's Country Crisp, it's a breakfast product that donates some of its money back to help nature reserves, to help bees and butterflies and birds thrive, as they say. Aldi in Germany has a Fair and Good line in which they dedicate a lot of resources towards taking good care of their animals. So in case of this ham, they note that they give their pigs more space and bedding and room to roam. So more of that communication back to how good of the lives that these animals had. And then in France, we see this French milk that is making very clear claims on the front of pack. I don't speak French, but thankfully the Global New Products Database translates that. And so this is really focusing on supporting fair wages. So you're seeing on this pack the claims of what they're paying their contract farmers. They dedicate a lot of education to their farmers. They help them diversify what they're growing and also help them invest in being able to grow the feed that they feed the cows on the farm. And so a lot of potential to be communicating a lot of information to consumers. And I think we can also think of that as the ingredient suppliers as well, is embracing some of these things. And a great example of that is actually a European import brand. So Oatly, which is an oat-based milk that's really causing a sensation in the US. I've heard that it has a lot of out of stocks because people are just so excited to try it. I recently got the chance to try it when I found it at a Target, and because I knew about the out of stocks, I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to buy this right now. And I was impressed because on the pack, it says that if you go to their website, they will tell you where their ingredients come from. Well, I was even more impressed when I went to their website, and not only do they say things like their oats are grown in the USA and Canada, but they also name the supplier and then hyperlink to that supplier's website. So you see Grain Millers here is who supplies their oats. Caldic, Cargill, Brentag, Givaudan also supplies their natural flavors. So giving a lot of transparency to consumers as to what happens in the ingredient landscape, where a lot of consumers might not necessarily know what's going on. And so I think that this is something to consider as a brand that is this trendy, really hot right now, is willing to give this level of transparency and really name their suppliers, link to their suppliers. The next step might be also the suppliers being able to tell those stories about what sets their ingredients apart when it comes to those agricultural efforts. And we may see more of this grow as blockchain becomes more integral into society. Blockchain is a really interesting new technology and something that we've been watching for a few years. I like to define it as kind of like a family tree, where every single step in a process has a link to what happened before it. And so we're seeing it being used in the diamond industry to be able to trace what has happened to diamonds and give consumers a proof that it is a conflict-free diamond. But when it comes to the food and drink industry, there's retailers like Walmart that are trying to use blockchain to be able to identify food safety scares much faster. So they're trying to put these places or projects into place. And so I think this is something to really consider. And what I was really struck by from IBM's website, they have a fantastic summary on everything that happens with blockchain, is their CEO saying what the internet did for communications, blockchain will do for trusted transactions. That's a big change coming if we think about how much the internet has really revolutionized the way we communicate with people. So in this case, when it comes to food and drink ingredients, it could be that someone like Oatly could give that full traceability view into a product by using that blockchain. So being able to link back to the farm, exactly what happened at the farm, and giving consumers this entire map of what had happened. And so I think that that's something that we could see down the line, and really a reason why we need to start paying attention to agriculture right now. So in terms of what we could be telling consumers, what are the hot topics that are out there right now? One being soil health. This is something that's still a little bit emerging, but is popping up more often, and is also a very needed activity to be embracing and trying to improve our soil health globally. Building partially into that is our second topic, which is regenerative agriculture. Soil health is part of this, but there are also a lot of elements of really doing the most good to the land, making sure it's as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And then the third topic we could be giving more of our clients and as eventually consumers more information about is farmer welfare. And so giving more information about where are our farms, who are our farmers, how do we take care of them, how do we pay them, and a lot more communication there. So we'll take a look at some summaries of those and then some great product examples that do a good job with this. So beginning with soil health. One of the topics that we could be giving people more education about what we're doing. So the UN FAO, or Food and Agriculture Association, says that we have 60 years left until the world's topsoil is completely eliminated. That's pretty shocking considering we really do need soil for so many different ingredients. So we are now seeing more companies invest in this, more companies pay attention to it, but now they're also educating consumers about why this is so important, why this needs to be done. And a fantastic example of this comes from Annie's. So Annie's Homegrown in 2018, what you see there on the left, was their limited edition Soil Matters release. They released this Honey Bunnies Grams and then also an elbow pasta and cheddar variety. These products were only available in Sprouts retailers, but they really emphasized, as you can see, this natural packaging. It has that little Soil Matters sign, if you can see it up there on the left. And then when you turned over the back of the pack, there was text about why soil health is so important. And then pictures of their farmers in Montana, naming them, saying why they invest in this. And so something that they're really elevating that understanding of soil health. Well, they've continued this in 2019 with a wider release. And what I was really impressed by when one of my colleagues shared this photo from Natural Products Expo West is just how big they're making this story on pack. Almost larger in terms of the font size than the actual name of the product, the shells and white cheddar, is "This Mac helps to protect our planet." Really taking a stake there, really sharing that information, and then telling you should turn over the back of the package to find out more about what they're doing. Where again, you'll see paragraphs of text about why soil health is important, why they're investing in regenerative agriculture, and also photos of more of their farmers from Montana, because now that this release has expanded, they have not just the one that they were naming in 2018, they now have multiple. So really taking the lead on this and something to think about in terms of that communication. We still are at a point where we need education about this to help consumers understand why this is so important. But when we can trust brands like Annie's to make some of those commitments and explain that to consumers, it may become more of a consumer demand to know what we're doing to improve our soil health. Soil health is also an element of regenerative agriculture, which is another emerging topic related to agriculture and something that more consumers want to know about. And so soil health is included in this. This is also a build out from organic as well. So that's why we see this stat on the side. 69% of Spanish adults, 64% of Italian adults, and 61% of French adults that Mintel has surveyed agree that producing food organically helps to protect the environment. So they're already understanding that, and regenerative agriculture just builds that out and extends that even more. One of my colleagues wrote a great piece about this, and so I borrowed their language because I think it's really powerful to just understand that regenerative agriculture demands that producers not only refrain from damaging the environment, but also improve it in the process. And so this is, again, something that could lead to a lot more consumer respect for what we're doing and how we conduct business. So soil health is part of this, increasing the biodiversity, so rotating plants and crops, enhancing ecosystems, improving water quality, empowering our farming communities, and also hopefully are reversing climate change as the most beneficial option there. And so we do see that some companies are making regenerative commitments, and this is on a large as well as on a small scale. So it's not really limited to who you might be and who you might be supplying. So General Mills, which owns Annie's Homegrown, has made a commitment that they launched or they announced right before Natural Products Expo West in March, where they want to improve their supply of regenerative agriculture to 1 million acres in the next few years. Danone makes regenerative agriculture a key platform of their corporate planet commitments. And then we see on the opposite side of it, smaller companies. So Patagonia, which you might think of as making really comfortable warm fleeces or things that you can wear when you're going out fishing and hiking. They also have a Patagonia Provisions part of their business where they're making food and drink. And part of that is to give natural and nutritious food and drink to people who might be living active outdoor lifestyles. But that also is giving back as part of that regenerative agriculture commitment is a big part of that. And then the product that you see here on the screen is White Leaf Provisions. And this is a baby food brand that's really leading with that biodynamic claim. And one of the reasons why I highlighted this, it is a smaller baby food brand, but it's something to consider as we start to think of who are the consumers who might really care about this. One of our analysts at Mintel wrote a great piece about why the baby food category might be a place for some of these organic and regenerative agriculture claims to start, because a lot of parents not only care about organic when they're buying baby food, but they are also looking at the long-term sustainability of products, because with this child that they've just had, they may also want to make sure that they are living on a healthy planet for as long as possible. And so that is something to consider as we move into more of these, that the baby food category might actually be a pioneer in regenerative agriculture or soil health claims, because the parents might really be looking at sustainability as a goal to keep them involved in the long term. And then our third and final hot topic to consider, if we are thinking about giving more information on agriculture to more consumers, is this concept of farmer welfare. So 33% of UK adults say ensuring fair pay to producers is important to them when making food and drink purchasing decisions. And so this is partially because we have seen more attention on dairy farmers in the UK. There was also in Australia as well with some fair pay and value pricing of milk. But it's also just in general a good story. You want to take care of your fellow humans, right? And so more of that emphasis on who are our farmers, what are they doing, even partially who are the employees on their farm, and how do we take care of them, and how do we educate them and empower them. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Food Navigator, which last week published this fantastic story, which helps to really showcase why this is so important to pay attention to. And this is a story about Unilever partnering with their vanilla supplier, Simrise, to create this Vanilla for Change program. And so in the UK, with their Walls ice cream brand, they are now giving QR codes on pack where consumers can scan those to get access to data points and all this information about the commitments that they've made to their vanilla farmers in Madagascar. And so I really liked this quote from Wall's global purpose and Vanilla for Change leader at Unilever, saying, "The challenge I wanted to address is translating sustainability into something that people would care about. The first thing I thought is, as human beings, we are interested in human stories." So really, soil health and regenerative agriculture are incredibly important, but also this human element, talking more, naming our farmers, showcasing who they are. And in this case, the Vanilla for Change program has so many different elements, all of which are beneficial. So they guarantee fair pay to their vanilla farmers in Madagascar. They have farmer field schools where they educate the farmers not only about agricultural elements, but also about doing business. And then they've also partnered with local charities to be able to enrich that community as a whole. So Save the Children, they have a partnership with, and recently formed a partnership with Me to We. I highly recommend this article on Food Navigator because it really gives a lot of input, but really showcases the fact that this is now translating into the ingredient supplier industry. And so it's not just that consumers want stories and we need the brands to be able to figure it out. It's that we can also supply that to our clients, to our manufacturers and retailers, and tell them more about what consumers want to hear and why you know more about your supply chain and why that might help set their product apart. So how should we tell our agricultural story? And this is a really interesting chart from our corporate social responsibility report, in which we ask consumers how they've learned about a brand or company's corporate social responsibility programs. And so I broke this out by generation to really showcase that obviously some communication elements are changing. As the CEO of IBM alluded to, we do see the internet really changing things. For Generation Z, which are the post-millennial generation, and this is just adults, so there's 18 to 24-year-olds. We do see that 52% of them are finding out about a brand or company's social responsibility through social media. This is also the top channel for millennials to find out about corporate or social responsibility commitments, whereas it kind of changes as people age. So Generation X, who we also know to be power users of social media, are slightly more likely to find out about a commitment through a TV commercial or a company website. And then with baby boomers and World War II or swing generations, so people born 1946 or earlier, we do see news articles being the most important. Print ads also are part of that as well. And so with this, I think it's not only figuring out which channels might match with your client or your supplier's particular focus market, but also the fact that we could be telling one story and giving the versatility to tell it in a TV commercial, as well as on social media, as well as putting out a press release to get a news article about it as well. So there's a lot of different ways to get these messages out there. One of the main reasons why we think what is happening with Generation Z is so important is because they are really showing a lot of interest in sustainability. Much like my point with baby food, this is a group of consumers. Right now, they're aged 11 to 24 in 2019. And these are consumers who have recognized they're going to have to live on this planet for longer. And so they are making vocal their feelings about lack of action on climate change. I don't know if anybody's heard of Greta Thornburg, but she's a Swedish teen who has organized via social media millions of walkouts of schools around the world where these high school and college students are leaving class to protest the lack of action on climate change in their communities from their governments. And so this is going to continue, again, to be a long-term interest, especially as this group of consumers really wants to know more. So what are some of the things they want to know? 58% of US adults aged 18 to 24, so these adult Generation Z members, say treating employees fairly is the best way for brands to represent their values. So more importance around that farmer welfare. 37% of UK internet users aged 12 to 18, so some of these teenagers, identify climate change as an environmental issue that is important to them. And 19% of Canadian adults aged 18 to 24, so again, this adult Generation Z members, say that advertising about a company's environmental efforts appeal to them. So a lot of different ways we could be getting the message out, but really showcasing that this demand is not likely to decrease. It's only likely to increase as these Generation Z members really want to know more. So a good example of what we could be doing, and this is a little bit old, but it's really one of my favorites. This is from 2017, but the French retailer You gave Snapchat spectacles to their supply chain for their seafood. And so if you're not familiar with Snapchat spectacles, they're glasses that have a video camera in it and will record live video. And so when you were a customer in the store, as you see there on the left, you were able to go into that store and scan this Snapchat code. That Snapchat code opened up the feed from the past 24 hours of how that fish got to the store. So showcasing what happened when the fisherman was out in the sea, what happened when it got to the docks, what happened when it got to the store. So really giving a whole new level of ephemeral, in this case, really things that are designed to disappear, which is what Snapchat is, and really showcasing that we know exactly where these fish came from. So a lot of potential to be tapping into that, especially with Generation Z, as they're interested in more of this real-time type of content, actual facts. We could be live streaming a harvest. We could be sharing more information about what a farmer is planting today. There's so many potential to really connect with the real live, real time what's happening. So just some key takeaways that I want to leave you with, and they're really more conversation starters or thought provokers, especially with this market as we see more people paying more attention to agriculture. When it comes to being an ingredient supplier, how can we tell that story? So beginning with, what agricultural details could your company share? What do you know about your supply chain? What do you think makes it unique? Especially for that second one, what practices are beneficial to your clients? Why is this something that could help them tell that soil health, that regenerative agriculture, or that farmer welfare story? And then how can you tell your stories in an engaging way? If it is something that you're allowing a client to unlock and share as part of their branded perspective, great. But how do we make sure that that content is something that people do actually want to know about? So can we tell it in a visual way? Can we show stories or videos? Or is it more just a traditional written format that we're looking for? So definitely things to consider, because we don't necessarily see this demand for agricultural sustainability going anywhere. I believe we do have time for some questions. I'll leave you with my information if you have any that you don't want to ask here. Does anybody have any questions? We've got one in the front row here.
Yeah, I'm just interested where you guys have seen food waste fall into this spectrum.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what we've been looking at in terms of food waste and where it fits into this spectrum, I think there's a lot more of that understanding from consumers about wanting to reduce their own personal food waste. So it's more, when we look at sustainability as being circular, I think it's more towards that end of use, of being more aware of what you might be going to waste in your household, being smarter about what you're buying. And then there might be a little bit of attention on retailers to look at it from an agricultural landscape. I'm not quite sure if consumers understand that much, but it is a great communication point. One of my favorite brands that does a great job of that is Barnana. And so they have upcycled banana snacks. They have these really great chewy bananas, and then they make crunchy plantains. And on the pack, they emphasize the fact that they are on site in Brazil where these are harvested and immediately making them into snacks so that they aren't going to waste. So it is also something that we consider to be important. But I think right now consumers' landscape is on, I want to make sure I don't throw away the food that I've purchased.
Yeah, Jenny, can you speak to some of the more progressive and thoughtful ways you're seeing people measure the impact of these type of programs? And what I'm really saying is the less self-serving ways of measuring them.
Yes, yeah. It's a great question. Just understanding more. And I think that's where the stories are so important. Yes, it's great to share out data points. A great example is Danone, and they have tied all of their sustainability efforts to the UN Sustainability Development Goals so that it is a bigger program than their own. So to be able to measure what's happening by a very, very large effort. So I think that's a great way of tying into that. I think right now where we are in terms of a starting point is consumers want to know you're making an effort. I think we may get in a couple years to, well, exactly how much land have you improved? How much is your soil health improved? But right now it's just really, you are a food company for good. Because I think there's a lot of skepticism out there about that people might not necessarily be looking at that better thing. But Danone is a great example of tying it to those sustainability development goals so we can have a universal way of measuring why these things are important or what commitments to make. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Well, great. Oh, wait, we got one right behind you.
Have you found any evidence that consumers are willing to pay even a slight premium for a product that has been sourced in a responsible manner versus one that has not?
Yes. It's a fantastic question. It's the $1 million question we always get. When we look at this and ask consumers what their priorities are, specifically in the US, it is still taste, low price, and ease of use that are the top three things that they look for. Sustainability is up there, I think about 40% of consumers. And what I think is really interesting with that is that it is actually that Generation Z and those millennials who are willing to pay a premium for it. Especially with Generation Z, if I'm going to be stereotypical about what millennials did as well, it might be a group of consumers who aren't fully responsible for paying all of their adult lives quite yet. So they can pay that premium. They don't necessarily necessarily know or are, absorbing everything it costs to make or to be an adult. But especially as we see more of these consumers really caring about sustainability, I think it is some of these products that target the Generation Z that have a lot of potential to say, this is why we're asking you to pay a little bit extra. One example that I actually replaced the Unilever example with is a drought relief milk that one of the retailers released in Australia, in which they asked consumers to pay just 10 cents more for the gallon of milk. And they shared that they also had a committee in place to guarantee that those additional funds went to farmers. And so I think that could also be part of that, to emphasize that there's a reason for why we're charging extra. I noticed it with the Annie's mac and cheese, because that's in the Mariano's where I shop in Chicago. And when I looked at the photo that I had taken afterwards, it was more expensive than the traditional mac and cheese. And it's because the organic on that pack is so little, but that's another reason. So I think they're really going at, okay, if this is something that's important to you, you may also need to pay extra. But it is still something that consumers aren't quite there yet. But I think these core consumers who are really focused on eco-conscious things are willing to pay that extra, because they do feel like if that company is going to make a difference. Patagonia is a great example where they are giving back so much that it's attracting a lot of consumers across a lot of categories, because they believe in what they're doing, and you understand that Patagonia isn't just saying this, they're actually giving back. Any other questions? Nope. All right, well, thank you guys very much.
All right, and for our last presentation of the day is Traceability 101, what food formulators and chemists need to know about automating track and trace. This session is sponsored by Bartender by Siegel Scientific, and I'd now like to introduce Elizabeth Sinclair.
Hi, everybody. I always wonder about the last session of the day, if it's people are looking for a place to sit or they're interested in the topic. I know generally when I've attended IFT, I'm looking for a chair at this time of day. I'm really happy to be here. I've been working in traceability for the last 6 years. And I'm especially happy to be here because I came here from the ingredient business. My very first giant trade show when I was a young not that young, marketing specialist at Univar was here at IFT. And I've always, I've been hoping for something like the Traceability Central, like here at IFT, because I see such a need for it. I've had first they told me not to stand close, and now I'm not close enough. So I've been amazed at how many people have come up to talk to me today, asking what traceability is and why we have it here. And it's so crucial to the food supply chain and food safety. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk with you about it now. I am an introverted writer type, so I am going to be working from my notes. I apologize in advance. It's not that I don't care about you all personally, it's that I'm just very nervous. So in 2014, I was asked by AIM Global, which is the Industry Association for Auto ID Technology, scanners, printers, encoders, software, to start a conversation about traceability, and specifically for food production, among my colleagues and competitors in our community of technology providers. I chaired AIM's Track and Trace Committee for its first 18 months. AIM can be a great resource for you as you embark on your traceability initiatives. After this presentation, if you'd like to talk about it, I'd be happy to connect you with resources at AIM. I know there's a tremendous desire in the auto ID sector to help partner with the global food industry to make the supply chain safe. So I'm not going to talk very much about our software because that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about how we can help you. But we transform information. There's our elevator pitch at Drive Business. We won the Frost & Sullivan Award for food safety supply chain software. And we're 5 years running on the Food Logistics 100 top technology providers for the food industry. So what is it that we do? I feel like I need to step away from the mic and point to tell you. So I have a colleague that says we're in every deli in America. So you say, I would like a half pound of turkey. they take the half pound of turkey and they put it on the weighing scale, which makes a call to, our software makes a call to the weighing scale to find out how much the product weighs. It makes a call to the pricing database, calculates, uses that information to calculate the price, create the barcode. It maybe makes a call to the ingredient database to put that on the label, maybe allergens, maybe calculates the use by date, and then sends it off to the printer. So beep, you can pay for your food. So that's kind of the micro version of what we do. We also run supply chain labeling for companies like Roche Pharmaceutical, GlaxoSmithKline, SpaceX, Tesla, General Motors, and probably of interest to this group, we run the supply chain labeling for Cargill and Coca-Cola. Food safety touches everyone. So these are my colleagues. This is, I don't know if you know a lot of software developers, but they really like Halloween. And before the launch of of a product a few years ago, it was October of 2015, we were having our Halloween party. We'd had our colleagues from Taipei, Tokyo, and Madrid come over for a Halloween party. By the way, the guy holding the Perrier bottle, that's our founder. That's the guy who invented the technology. And he is actually, for Halloween, he was our CEO, who's the big guy with the beard there. He dressed up as our CEO. Anyway, it's a little insight into the culture at our company. So it was a great Halloween party. It was catered by a Mexican restaurant you may have heard about that 2 days after our Halloween party had an E. coli scare and closed all of their restaurants in Portland and Seattle, including the one that catered our party. So, we immediately became concerned that we were going to be the vector, patient zero, for a global E. coli outbreak. Everybody turned out okay in the end, except we're still kind of an odd collection of folks. But it's a concern. It touches everyone. And I want you to know that the special needs of the food industry are top of mind, not only for my company, but for the whole auto ID industry. The food supply chain is so vast and so complex and increasingly so global that regulatory agencies and industry organizations have a hard time keeping up with what happens between the ranch, fishery, farm, or processing plant to the table. And actually, on the way here, on the way to the airport yesterday morning, I saw a produce truck with a cool slogan. Instead of saying farm to fork, it said farm to family, which really appealed to the marketer in me. As you know, global regulatory bodies are addressing food safety with traceability regulations, because if you can provide visibility to the supply chain, understand a product's journey from beginning where it was grown or manufactured and ending when it lands on the consumer's table, you've enabled the agility required for quick responses to food safety incidents. The food sector, unlike the other sectors that we work with, like pharma and medical devices, is very fragmented. It's a few large entities, but mostly you all are small to mid-sized producers, transporters, and manufacturers, which means one of the challenges here has been finding a common language, a way for all members of a supply chain to track and record this same information in the same way. So adherence to global standards and automation technology solutions are going to be necessary to enable compliance with the new global regulations. And we're at a super interesting time in food traceability. There are a number of competing standards right now, each vying to be the ultimate solution. It's like Clash of the Titans for supply chain tracking. You have to have the same syntax and taxonomy in the data if you're going to have a truly interoperable supply chain. I think our friends over at GS1 are going to win the battle. They know what they're doing. They've been around for a long time. Their people understand the needs of the industry. So why are we here? Well, you've been looking at this slide. Consider this. In the US alone, more than 128,000 people are hospitalized every year as a result of foodborne illness, according to the CDC. 3,000 people die. Beyond the obvious public health issues, companies have another strong incentive to comply with food safety regulations. The cost of a food safety recall can be significant. Deloitte estimates in the U.S. product recalls cost $10 million per incident, and that's not just the cost of food lost or the cost of the recall itself, but due to the loss of brand equity and consumer confidence in their name. And approximately 80% of small to mid-sized businesses fail within 2 years of a product recall. And if that weren't incentive enough, remember Peanut Corporation of America in 2008, executives went to prison. Interestingly enough, the greatest single cause for food recalls in the US is not contamination, it's not pathogens, it's labeling issues. So wrong lot or batch numbers, missing allergens, wrong ingredients. And this to me is a direct result of companies that use manual processes. The more you can take human beings out of the process, the more accuracy you're going to find in your system. So Stephen Gendel at a conference I attended a few years ago said FSMA is the first time that labeling has been considered a public health safety measure, along with sanitation and other controls. It's interesting because labeling has traditionally been considered a means to convey information, right? For the food industry, this is stuff like ingredients, allergens, weight, supply chain management, tracking and tracing. But now labeling is considered a key public health driver. And keep in mind as we talk today that when we talk traceability with the food industry, we're not only talking to you, but the entire food supply chain. So growers, ranchers, fishers, companies that specialize in transport, storage, and logistics, and also groceries, restaurants, and other retailers. I know that everyone here cares about free from, natural and clean labeling, but I don't know if you understand that making of these claims requires impeccable supply chain tracking. It's now incumbent upon manufacturers who make those claims to own a depth of product information not ever previously gathered, and maybe not even considered important. We can talk about that same Mexican food chain that made some seagulls sick a few years ago. They ran a campaign called GM Over It, where they said that they had no GMOs in their supply chain, right? Well, unfortunately, the little piggies that go into their carnitas come from farms that use corn and soy-based food. Their fountain drinks, most of them are sweetened with HFCS, and so they had GMO in their supply chain. Class action suit was filed, and to me, this was strictly a function of not understanding their supply chain. Manufacturers have to curate an unprecedented breadth of ingredient and supply information. And again, what a tall order to do if you're using manual processes to do so. Maybe because of its fragmented nature, the food industry lags far behind the other regulated and non-regulated industries in adoption of supply chain automation initiatives. It's a little bit shocking to me sometimes that, again, I've had conversations today with multiple people who say, oh, they just key something into a spreadsheet, or they have somebody who handles the lot numbers manually. As some of you may personally know, many fisheries, for example, use first-generation Kanban cards to trace the supply chain, meaning that's an index card that follows the fish when it comes out of the hole in the ocean through the supply chain. Now, that said, some of the major fisheries in the U.S. have our product shipboard, and I tend to be encouraged by that because I like to eat fish, and I want to eat fish that's been tracked appropriately. So no current food safety regulations globally require automated tracking, which is very much unlike what FDA said about pharmaceuticals and medical devices. But most experts believe it's a matter of time, and not just me. This is talking to people at the Global Food Traceability Center of IFT a few years ago. Said when they talk to FDA, it sounds like it's coming. You'll be expected to have automated track and trace. And if you're going to automate your supply chain, if you're going to enable traceability to the extent that current laws require, and you're using manual processes, that's really a tall order, and I'm not really sure how that's going to happen. So while several groups actively promote food safety policy, industry organizations, large retailers like Walmart, It's the global regulators that have the teeth to mandate and drive food safety compliance. So each nation of Asia has its own regulatory agency and set of laws. The EU has its general food law, food information to consumers. In the US, we have FSMA. And FSMA is interesting to me because it's the first real food supply chain policy enacted in the US since 1938. It makes a departure from previous food safety regulations, emphasizing preventive controls over corrective measures. And as most of you are probably aware, FSMA is broad. It covers things like production site standards, training requirements, and it covers traceability. So current EU and US track and trace regulations require that any company that handles, produces, or processes food be able to track every ingredient back one node in the supply chain and upstream one node in the supply chain. And in the case of a regulatory mock audit or an actual recall, you're required to produce that data within 24 hours. So that 24-hour time window for one up, one down traceability, that to me is a powerful incentive for automating your supply chain. If the food chain were binary, one ingredient into one product, each product advancing to the same upstream node, that 24-hour window would be pretty easy to achieve. But it's not binary, and that's a challenge. The next stop for a single lot of pollock fished out of the Gulf of Alaska might be a variety of locations all over the world. It might end up as an ingredient in surimi, and in pet food, and in frozen fish sticks, and in canned products processed in Asia, North America, Europe, anywhere. So another challenge FSMA presents to manual processes is its requirement that establishment keep records of all labeling. That's an image of every label that you produce. That record must include the final label as applied to the product formulation, an accounting of the product's processing procedures, and any supporting documentation, meaning evidence that the labeling's in compliance with all regulations. So I can't see a way for the food industry to accomplish this without technology enabled by automation and a supply chain that's interoperable. So I want you to know, if you're scrambling for track and trace solutions, you're not alone. I hear from panic companies every week that haven't even begun their traceability transition. And you need to know, though, that manual tracking processes, this might even mean Excel spreadsheets with keyboard data entry, put your organization at risk. The more human input your system requires, the more opportunity for error is built in. If you can't meet the 24-hour window or to provide data in the case of a recall or mock audit, you're in serious trouble with regulators. And maybe you've exposed yourself to civil and perhaps criminal action if somebody gets sick. So that's the stick. Here's your carrot. You can extract tremendous value beyond regulatory compliance from a well-designed auto ID deployment. Traceability regulations afford the opportunity to evaluate and integrate existing processes, amplify existing efficiencies, and gain new ones. A well-deployed automation initiative provides the opportunity to standardize methodologies, examine and perhaps reorder master data, and implement a single source of truth strategy. You can create a leaner supply chain and save time, money, and resources. With well-curated, accurate data, visible data, companies have done things like optimize accounting, transport planning, and inventory management. And the good news from my perspective is that the world's automation technology providers, like my company, have already helped medical device and pharma manufacturers meet very similar global regulations. It's not our first rodeo. We've done this before. We understand the promises and the pitfalls. So where do you start? You've decided that automated tracking of your supply chain is your new direction. You're going to buy scanners and software and thermal transfer labeling printers. So where do you start? Big companies have a much easier time. They're used to working in cross-functional teams. They have methods for meeting and communicating. Framework for projects that require really disparate groups to work together. So, excuse me, the first thing you need to do is put together your team, establish your own framework for working together, Making sure that you have input from all facets of your organization that will be impacted is going to help ensure buy-in from stakeholders, and it allows your project to reflect business needs. In other words, let your IT group participate in the discussion, but let the business drive the project and let IT be the resource that enables it. Your team is going to need members from the commercial side, from the ops side, from the executive offices, and for IT. And for some small companies, that might all be the same person. Company-wide buy-in is essential to a successful deployment. You can create that by garnering input from anybody who is going to touch the project or who the project is going to touch. Talk with them early and often. Plan for ongoing communication to your entire company, even those who aren't involved in the project, especially at milestones. So you've got a right team, you've got a budget and a communications plan. What's your system going to do? What is your goal for this traceability system? I know it seems obvious, but so many projects are initiated with no sense of direction, only a sense of need. Start at the end and work backwards. The goals for the project will change over time, and that's okay, but you need to have a set of measurable goals for your system before you start. Most companies don't have the internal expertise to create a traceability system. It's a complex proposition. If you bring in a consultant early, just to get you started, they can help you define your processes, describe the limits of your project. From then, maybe you'll decide you can do the rest on your own. And there are, in our Traceability Central area today, I don't know that I would call them consultants, but there are several end-to-end software providers that I know that have the expertise to help you get this set up right. So finally, a couple of case studies. This was a small-scale example, but it speaks to the powerful benefits in adopting auto ID technology. How about that cow? I love that cow. So this is so it was a small boutique dairy with the potential to expand into new markets. It was an organic dairy. So in the dairy industry, you're required to take a sample and then test it like every 12 hours. You keep it in an ice bath, test it for pathogens before it's cleared to go out into the food supply chain. They were taking 11,000 samples a year. Multiply that times 12 vials, and they were doing 132,000 labels per year by hand. It was error prone. It was expensive to run, and in the case of a recall, the data would have been difficult to retrieve. It hindered their ability to make incursions into new markets. Supply chain visibility and traceability is important when you're trying to sell your brand into a new market. The people want to know that your practices are impeccable. There was an added complexity of the environment, so they stored those samples in an ice bath for 12 hours. Which required special labels and adhesives and substrates. So technology partners joined, and they created a system that the dairy could manage and scale on their own. They picked special label media and inks and it used our software to formalize and serialize sample information. It enabled the farm to tie to a central database, capturing not only data from the labels, but also images of the labels printed, data such as who printed the labels, and what time and date. This created a scalable, traceable system, and the technicians that had been managing all this data by hand, now they're able to go work on other projects and do their real jobs instead of inefficiently tracking their samples. Aspen Systems is one of those systems integrators that provides end-to-end food supply chain software. And in fact, many people that own our software don't even know that they use it because it sits so deeply under the hood of an Infor or HighJump or Oracle or SAP system. So Aspen is one of those companies that integrates Bartender in their food production management product called Canopy. And Kowalski had a problem, Kowalski Sausage out of Hamtramck, Michigan, and they called on Aspen to help them. They had no IT expertise in-house, but they made a noble stab at taking care of things on their own. IT work generally fell to the accounting group, which is never a good thing. And so, like for example, one of the problems they had is their frozen pierogies have a pull-by date of 12 months, right? and they were keying in the pull by date manually. So on more than one occasion, someone would fat finger the date and the product would be returned because it had been delivered with a pull by date that was 10 years in the past. So you never want somebody calling you up and saying, why did you send me product that expired 10 years ago, right? Well, it didn't. It was just human error. So now our software makes that calculation for them and prints it on the label with no fingers involved. They had the issue that pallet IDs and lot numbers weren't necessarily jiving. They would go into the label and manually add a field for the total number of cases, which again invites the possibility of human error into your system. And now, because our software keeps a record of all their labeling, if a ghost label gets printed, they'll know something's missing and they'll be able to track that internally before it gets released out into the wild. They are now scoring 100 on their Costco audits, which is pretty much unheard of. And they attribute that to Canopy's automated label generation that comes from Bartender and the record keeping. And again, they don't have a lot of IT expertise in-house, but it's not an issue because training and adoption is so straightforward on Windows-based software. It's fairly foolproof, and they've got non-technical people doing fairly technical work because the software is handling all those processes for them. So that's what I have today. Does anyone have a question? So someone earlier today was asking me about unit level traceability, which is it's a thing. I mean, it's coming. We're seeing item level traceability. There are two players that are fighting for control in that. I'm working with both on that project. One is Amazon. Their initiative is called Transparency. For CPGs, they've already onboarded 3,000 brands in Asia. They embarked on their European endeavor on the 1st of this month. And the goal is that every item sold through the Amazon marketplace will be identifiable to the item level. And where this comes from is, social theorists call it the thin interface. So when I was a kid, my parents relied on Walter Cronkite to tell them what the news was. I wake up every morning, I roll over in bed, I boot up my iPad and go to a news aggregator and get my own news. I don't use a travel agent to book travel, I do it myself online. Consumers want that kind of immediate access to data. And now that we all have, in our pockets, this device, which could have launched all of the Apollo space missions, consumers want that event, want to retrieve that information themselves. So with a transparency initiative, there's a special transparency code that manufacturers buy from Amazon. And our software feeds that, creates the code, puts it on the package. And the interesting thing about the Amazon project is they're expecting any UPC, if you sell it, it's in the transparency program, if you sell it on the Amazon marketplace, but you also sell it at CVS or Walgreens or Kroger's, it's still going to have the transparency code on it and be identifiable to the package level. And at the same time, our friends over at GS1 have a project called Digital Link, which is very similar, except that it takes you to a website. So you can, depending on what avenue you use to scan the code, you can go to a browser, or there are different companies that are making apps, companies that are providing like nutritional information. You can click on the nutritional app and click on the code, and it will take you to a site with the nutritional information. Or whatever the provenance is of the item, where it came from, who the suppliers were, where the ingredients were manufactured, where they came from. I've talked to my consultants that I work with at Gartner, and they anticipate within the next 8 years, this will be something that'll just come to be expected. So as you start thinking about your labeling and the information that you're providing to consumers, this should be something that you keep in mind. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just had a question. I don't know if I missed. I just step away for a second, but I was wondering what Bartender is doing and what you guys are seeing in terms of item level traceability.
Yeah. So it's that Amazon Transparency project, and it's the GS1 project. And again, so Amazon envisions it as an anti-counterfeiting initiative largely because there's so much bad product sold on Amazon, but also for things like conflict minerals. I mean, it's not food related, but they can squeeze that out of supply chain. No consumer wants conflict minerals. People don't want blood diamonds, and they'll be able to find out for themselves if that's, if a product they're buying is something they don't want to have.
So I'm working on seafood traceability guidance for
Yeah.
the industry.
Yes.
And I had the opportunity to tour Metro Cash and Carry in Germany, and they were using the data bar and the data matrix to put batch lot information
Yes.
into the packaging that was used at point of sale. So that way they could connect the G10, the batch lot, the date, weight, all that stuff directly to the invoice that was going to the customer. And it requires updating the point of sale system to be able to do that, to be compatible with those things. That's been a hurdle in the US with retailers to date. Where do you see the adoption?
So here's
that.
what I see driving that adoption is when you're doing that, you are able to pull the master data from one source for all your labeling, your palleting, your POS codes, all the stuff you need can all be tied to one data source. It provides tremendous accuracy and tremendous efficiencies in your supply chain. So, and that's, it sounds very complex and hard to even wrap my brain around, but it's something that our software and my competitors do as a matter of course.
But do you see the retailers actually adopting that and updating their POS systems to handle it? Because a couple times I've tried it, like at the self-checkout, and you've never seen such mad people that have to go debug the self-checkout because it freezes up if you run those.
Here's what I have to say about that. If Walmart decides it's a thing, then it will become a thing, right?
All right, we'll work on Taegis.
Yeah.
We'll send him a text.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I was just talking earlier about the Produce Traceability Initiative, which was a huge initiative in our industry where it was going to be a standardized label to trace all produce and everybody was going to have it. And it fizzled, I think was the word that someone used. I was at a conference, a supply chain conference a few years ago, and I asked some berry farmers, so how's your PTI initiative coming along? And they looked at me like I had a second head. And then I said, your traceability. They said, oh, yeah, we care about that a lot. Well, interestingly enough, it fizzled until Walmart decided that was a pretty good template for a produce label and mandated that every pallet of produce that went into their facility had that label on it. And within months, you saw that label at Costco and Safeway and Kroger. It just became the standard. So again, when Walmart says, then that's what happens. And they're making incursions now into blockchain, and we'll see what happens there. But technology and society move ahead, and sometimes POS companies have to catch up.
Excellent, thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for. Oh, there's one more question.
Sorry, one quick final kind of complicated question. I'm from the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. I was wondering if your organization is focused at all on much more complicated supply chains like palm oil or soy that often touch sometimes 8 to 12 actors before it even gets to the item level.
Absolutely. And I think that's not so much a function of the software because we're data agnostic, and there can be, I don't know if anyone's ever calculated how many data points our software can manage. That to me is more a function of standards like GS1 provides and the larger system. So, the ultimate goal is that we have an interoperable supply chain where everybody speaks the same language. It's the only way we're going to have a completely traceable way to look at our food chain, and particularly in complex supply chains like palm oil. We're data agnostic. You just tell us what to do and we'll do it. But it's people like, it's the standards organizations like GS1. It's the larger systems, some of the end-to-end food management software programs that are here in the Traceability Central. They're the ones that are really going to control how that's implemented. That's a really good question, though.